Did you know that sea otters were once hunted to near extinction for their fur, and that without them, entire underwater forests collapse? Hello, listeners, and welcome to H2O and Beyond. My name is Alex Hahn, and each week we dive into the science, systems, and stories behind the water we use every day. Today we're going to be exploring the story of one of the ocean's most surprising heroes, the sea otter. And to help us learn more about sea otters and why exactly they're so important and their history, I'm joined by Mr. Giancarlo, the ocean's advocate from Environment Oregon. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Giancarlo. It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, something I like to ask my guests before we start is to usually explain a little bit about themselves, who they are, what you do, and the place you work at.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Giancarlo. As you know, I am the Oceans Advocate for Environment Oregon, like you just talked about. Environment Oregon is a statewide grassroots environmental advocacy organization that works to basically ensure that nature can thrive in Oregon. We kind of envision a cleaner, greener Oregon, where species like sea otters, for example, like in my job, are protected kind of in the long run. So broadly, kind of in my job, I work to protect and advocate for marine ecosystems and wildlife in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, and as part of your job, have you been on many other podcasts before or interviews?
I've done a few interviews, but not podcasts specifically. But I guess I should elaborate a little bit more and say that my a big scope of my job is trying to bring the public along into these kind of conversations. Yeah. So podcasts are definitely a great forum or avenue to kind of do that. And really just make sure that people are aware of the problems because they can't actually do anything about them if they don't know about them.
Yeah, I know advocacy is a huge part of, what you guys do. And I want to ask, like, what got you, like, exactly into this industry? And, like, why are you so passionate about it?
Yeah, I kind of have an interesting story. So I'm actually from the East Coast, like you. I grew up in New England, and I actually have an engineering degree. I went to school for environmental engineering, which is very technical. And I kind of just chose that career path because I was really good at math and science, and my dad was also an engineer.
Yeah.
So I was like, clearly, this is what I want to do because it blends environment and engineering. And it turns out it just wasn't for me. I really just wanted to get more involved, like proactively in environmental issues, or have like more of a hands-on impact. And a lot of my work was kind of retroactive. I worked in an environmental remediation, so it was like literally by definition, like cleaning up messes that other companies or corporations kind of left behind. And I had the opportunity to get involved with Environment Oregon and our actual sort of broader network of environmental organizations. We have 30 organizations, kind of 30 different state groups across the country that kind of share similar values of working to ensure that that state really just lets nature thrive. And that was like my first sort of entry point into environmental advocacy was through these network of organizations that I've been a part of for almost 5 years now.
Yeah, and like, was there a reason you chose Oregon over any other state?
No, I've actually moved around a little bit. Like I said, we have 30 state groups across the country. So I got my start actually with our Colorado group, Environment Colorado, and worked there for a couple years, working on obviously not sea otter issues. There are no sea otters in Colorado, but on other environmental issues that we were focused on, like eliminating plastic pollution, advocating for more sustainable transit in and around the Denver area, and then working to protect pollinators in the high country of Colorado as well. And then I had an opportunity to move here. There was an opening for the Oceans Advocate, so I was really interested in wanting to protect marine ecosystems and thought I would give it a try. So I've been here specifically for almost 2 years.
Wow. Well, yeah, you certainly have a really interesting story, and thank you for sharing with our audience. So, to start off with some context, could you tell our listeners a little bit about like where sea otters live and what makes them so unique among marine mammals?
Yeah, absolutely. So sea otters are basically unique to the Pacific. There are no sea otters in the Atlantic or the Arctic or Indian Oceans. And they primarily live basically from California all the way up around Alaska and kind of through the Aleutian Islands a little bit, and then down into parts of Russia and the very top portion of Japan. There's two different here in the United States.
Hmm.
Or I guess I should say in the Eastern Pacific, there's two subspecies of sea otters. There's northern sea otters and southern sea otters. But functionally, they basically do the same things,
Yeah.
as we'll talk about a little bit later, I think. There's no real difference besides their size. One is a little bit bigger than the other one. But again, they serve the same ecosystem value. And I would say the thing that probably makes them the most unique is that they have incredibly dense fur.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately what partially led to their collapse as a population, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. And then my personal kind of just favorite thing about them is I just love how social they are.
Yeah.
And I personally just think they are one of the cutest animals on the planet. And so being able to advocate for them, I think is kind of easier than other animals that maybe don't look as charismatic.
Yeah, and you mentioned how friendly these sea otters are. Is this a thing where you can just like go up to the shoreline of Oregon, you can like see them floating around the beaches? Is that how it works, or?
Yeah, so they are wild animals,
Mhm.
and they are protected under a couple federal laws, and so it's actually illegal to get close to them deliberately. And they can be aggressive. We actually don't have them in Oregon right now, which I'm sure we can talk about. We have them in
Yeah.
Washington and California and in Alaska. Um, so I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in places like California, you can oftentimes go to certain areas on the coast and be within, I don't know, like 50 to 100 feet of them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've tried swimming in the water on the West Coast. And I know they have like really cold currents there, so I guess that's why they need their incredibly dense fur.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing that's kind of unique, and this is probably why their fur is so dense, is they don't have any blubber. So like if you look at a seal, they're kind of hefty looking. They
Yeah.
have a lot of fat on them. Sea otters do not. They basically rely on this fur to stay warm. Obviously, like you said, the Pacific's very cold,
Yeah.
so it needs to be really dense. And in some cases, it's so dense that the juvenile ones that are born actually have a hard time sinking in the water. They basically kind of float because of how buoyant their fur is.
Yeah, well, every species is important to an ecosystem, but sea otters are often called like what is the word? Oh, they're often called a keystone species. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so I would say that is kind of like biologist or scientist speak for like an essential species.
Mhm.
So you could imagine like in an archway, the keystone is the thing that holds it together at the
Okay.
top, and if you remove it, the arch collapses. And ecosystems are kind of built similarly, like theoretically, where in ecosystems that have sea otters in them when they're removed over time, these ecosystems can have like basically there's just negative downstream implications or effects of not having sea otters, and that spells problems. It's basically like a domino effect.
I think this provides a nice transition into like these sea otters. They play such a big role in the ecosystem, but as I mentioned in the intro, there was a time where they almost completely disappeared from the ecosystem in the Pacific. What caused their population to crash in like the 1700s and 1800s?
Yeah, so as we talked about, they actually have the densest fur of any marine mammal or any animal on the planet actually. So basically in like a golf ball sized sort of square inch or
Yeah.
so, that like in that size, there's 1.5 million hair fibers. Which is a lot. That is far denser than a head of human hair. Um and because of that, it's incredibly soft and it's incredibly warm and insulating. So when people were really starting to colonize the western coast of the Pacific Northwest,
Mhm.
or just the Pacific, sorry, people really realized that their fur was valuable, and they unfortunately kind of hunted them to excess for their fur, and they were an incredibly lucrative part of the fur trade on the Pacific coast, to the point where in many places they were functionally extinct or just disappeared altogether, with a small pocket of them kind of surviving in central California, that never actually fully disappeared, and has kind of sustained like a low but stable-ish population for now. They disappeared from Oregon and they disappeared from Washington but there was a successful reintroduction attempt, or a reintroduction effort done in the late 60s, early 70s in Washington, and a failed one in Oregon. So we still don't have them. And then British Columbia and Alaska still have stable populations of them.
Yeah, and you mentioned that the introduction to Oregon failed. Can I ask why?
Yeah, so I am not an expert specifically on that reintroduction,
Hmm.
but from my understanding is it was not planned well
All right.
really at all. And I think they didn't actually take enough sea otters, like they didn't bring enough sea otters with them to do the introduction properly. I believe it was less than 100 was the initial like sort of dose. I could be wrong on that number, but I believe it was less than 100. And that's kind of the challenge with endangered species, right? Is you want them to thrive, but if you're taking a like an endangered species which is already low in number, and it's not a for sure sort of it's not guaranteed that a reintroduction will happen or go well in the long term. And so you could just essentially end up killing more of a species that's
Yeah.
endangered by taking them from somewhere where they're doing well and putting them in a different spot.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess careful planning is sort of key when you're trying to reintroduce these species. And back when these sea otters were all hunted near extinction, who were the people that actually first noticed the decline? Was it the hunters themselves?
Yeah, so I think just they're incredibly important for coastal communities generally, or people that just visit the coast a lot. It's pretty noticeable. Like they're larger animals, right? So like if you're going to the coast continuously and
Hmm.
seeing it every day, pretty soon you're just going to start noticing things disappearing. And if you're not seeing sea otters every day, it's kind of apparent. And then, yes, the hunters specifically would be an example of people who are having a harder time, um, you know,
Yeah.
succeeding.
Yeah, I forgot if you mentioned this before, but how many sea otters exactly were left until people stopped hunting them?
Yeah, so I think they were kind of saved by the bell, to put it kind of lightly, where I think there in California, there were a couple thousand left. And then again, in Oregon and Washington, they were kind of functionally extinct, or basically had all but disappeared. Like there's no stable population.
Mhm.
Um, and they kind of first gained protections under the Fur Seal Treaty in the early 1900s, which in part helped protect them, or at least stop the hunting of them to some degree. Um, but yeah, like a couple thousand in California, and then they never have really had a long term problem in Alaska in the United States.
I see. And this first seal treaty, was it an agreement among the different countries of the Pacific to um stop otter hunting or
Yeah, so that's kind of the interesting thing is we're talking about sea otters here, but the Fur Seal Treaty also was around other marine mammals like fur seals, hence the name Fur Seal Treaty. So in many ways, that was kind of an agreement or pact between countries in the Pacific. Not every country, obviously, but the ones that primarily hunted fur seals and sea otters to basically help recover their population to some degree or put a pause on their decline. So yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. And how effective has this treaty been?
Well, so that was established in the early 1900s, and then since then, I would say that the majority of sea otters protections nowadays come from the Marine Mammal Protection Act in the United States and the Endangered Species Act in the United States. They are listed as endangered under both acts,
Mhm.
which gives them strong protections from basically killing or harm in any kind, for the most part, with a small sort of exception for tribal nations who
Mhm.
rely on them for subsistence living or
Yeah.
for cultural purposes.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I want to go back to the otters being a whole keystone species. When they disappeared, what exactly happened to the ecosystems that they left behind?
Yeah, so sea otters are really important for kelp forests. Sort
Mhm.
of a cool nickname for them is like the guardians of the kelp forest, so to speak, where they live and inhabit these ecosystems and they rely on them themselves. But they also really love to eat species and keep species in check that like to eat kelp. So, for example, in places like Oregon, where we haven't had sea otters in a long time, there has been an overabundance of sea or kelp grazing predators like purple sea urchins, for example. Purple sea urchins, do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know
I
what
know
they?
they're like the spiky things, right?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
these like little spiky balls, kind of like about this big.
Yeah.
Um, and they eat kelp forests, and otters really like to eat them. And in places without sea otters nowadays on the Oregon coast, we've seen an increase, and this statistic really surprised me, an increase of over 10,000%.
Wow.
10,000% compared to in places where we used to have sea otters. So that percentage increase, this is what we're going like. This is what's going back to like the keystone species, right?
Mhm.
Like it's very clear to see like if you remove an animal or a critter from an ecosystem and they're not like functionally essential to the ecosystem, you won't see a percentage increase in another sort of animal to
To
that
that
degree.
extent, right?
And
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like 10,000% is crazy.
Yeah, it is.
And that is not manageable for kelp forests at all. This also kind of coincided at a time where in the 2010s there was this unusually warm period of water in the Pacific called the blob, in the northern Pacific, I should say. And this unusually warm water, we think, helped spur the cause of this thing called sea star wasting disease, which really negatively impacted all sorts of sea stars across the Pacific coast, but primarily sunflower sea stars, which are the only other predator or primary predator of purple sea urchins. So we had this time in the 2010s where we didn't have sea otters, and then sunflower sea stars also started to disappear. And that basically led to this total like free reign for purple sea urchins. And that's why their numbers are so high. And then statistically, there's been a lot of research recently done in Oregon by this group actually called the Oregon Kelp Alliance,
Mhm.
who basically issued a status report on, or basically an inventory of Oregon's kelp forests. And they've seen that just within the past 10 years, or so, roughly 2/3 of our kelp forests have disappeared.
Yeah, I want to ask, like, how exactly do these sea urchins eat? Like beef of the east. I'm not really familiar with that. Do they just like float around, or do they have like?
Yeah,
Do
so
they just?
they're bottom dwelling.
Okay.
So they kind of exist on the bottom habitat, and they kind of move around a little bit. And then they attack the holdfasts of the kelp, which are the things that actually kind of anchor them to the bottom.
Yeah, and what about sea stars? Yeah, how did sea stars eat the sea urchins?
Yeah, so they're animals just like sea otters, so they have a mouth, and then they kind of just consume them. Like,
Okay.
have you seen like sea stars, or the incorrect term is starfish? It's the same thing,
Yeah.
but have you seen them at the aquarium or anything?
Yeah, I've seen that at I know they have like a tiny mouth at the
Yeah, it's
bottom,
on the
right?
bottom.
Yeah.
So for context, it's underneath them, so you can't actually see their mouth when they're kind of on something. But for context, sunflower sea stars are quite big.
Okay.
Like they're like uh they can be like 3-ish feet wide. So they're pretty big.
Yeah. I think the sea star I was thinking about was like the one that's like the size of your hand. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was
no, they're
yeah.
much bigger
Okay.
than.
Makes sense. And how big and extensive are these kelp forests? I know like at the Georgia Aquarium we have a lot, and they have like is it go up to 100 feet tall. I correct?
Yeah, so they can grow really rapidly. Kelp is one of the fastest growing plants. It's actually a misnomer. They're not actually a plant, it's an algae. But functionally we kind of term them as plants.
Yeah.
But they can grow I think over a foot a day, if they have the right conditions. And yeah, so they can grow to over 100 feet tall. And in Oregon specifically, we don't have a ton of kelp forest coverage across the coast compared to California or Washington. But I would still say that we have hundreds of acres of it across the coast, or at least we should have hundreds of acres of
Yeah.
it if we didn't have the sea urchin problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it just shows to the extent, like, this big extent of how bad the problem is, because if they could grow like a foot per day and you guys have this like 10,000% increase of sea urchins like eating these kelp forests and preventing them to grow, I think that just shows how big the problem is.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Hmm. Yeah, and yeah, I heard something pretty shocking recently. I heard that kelp forests actually contribute to the production of 70 to 80% of the Earth's oxygen. Does this sound correct?
Yeah, so I think that might be a little bit of an incorrect statistic. I
Mhm.
think so kelp forests are incredibly important as carbon storing like plants, quote unquote. Like I said, that kind of growth means that they're consuming a lot of carbon and actually pulling it into their structures. And so that's really useful, and they're really important because they also are like the foundations of coastal ecosystems and are really essential on the Pacific coast for having just healthy coastlines and healthy ecosystems overall. I think the number that you're specifically referring to is um, I think that is like grouping all marine algae together.
Okay.
So one of the largest sort of carbon sequestration things on the planet is our ocean and the marine algae that call it home, like across everywhere. And so I think that's where that percentage comes from.
Okay, I see. And when I read these articles about nature, keep seeing this term pop up. It's called like a trophic cascade. What exactly is that, and how does it apply to otters?
Yeah, so it's kind of like again, biologists and scientists like to use a lot of fancy phrases, but it's kind of more or less a domino effect.
Yeah. Okay.
So like if you do one thing, it will have five, six, seven, eight, and so on downstream effects, oftentimes in a negative way. And so sea otters are a keystone species, right? So if you remove them, you end up with this place where there's too many sea urchins, and then the sea urchins is like one step of the trophic cascade, and then you don't have kelp forest, which is the second step, and then if you don't have kelp forest, which is the habitat for XYZ number of other species, then it just keeps going. And then the species that used to live there are also important for other animals who like to eat
Hmm.
them or that they eat. And so it's just like it's kind of like it's like a domino effect, is I think is a good word
Yeah.
that I think about, and then also kind of like undoing a shoelace. I also think is a good way to think
Okay.
about it.
Yeah. I never thought about that. And these otters have any other significance besides eating the sea urchins that help? Besides eating the sea urchins that eat the kelp, do they serve any other purpose in the ecosystem?
I for ecosystem value, I think that's like the primary thing is they do a
Hmm.
good job of keeping kelp grazers at check. I would say that they also, and this is a great example of this is actually in Central California in this place called Elkhorn Slough. Elkhorn Slough is an estuary, so it's not a kelp forest, but in the estuary there is another really important plant called seagrass or eelgrass
Hmm.
that exist in meadows. This is true kind of across the Pacific Northwest. And they have a lot of the same values that kelp forests have in that they help store carbon. They're the habitat for a whole host of different marine species. And unfortunately, estuaries across the Pacific have been impacted negatively by this invasive species called European green crabs, which again are invasive, so they wreak havoc on these ecosystems. And unfortunately, the European green crabs damage the eelgrass and cause kind of similar problems that the purple sea urchins have done to kelp forests. Not like one for one, but like similar-ish,
Yeah.
similar enough for the broader sense of things. And what we've seen in Elkhorn Slough, actually, that's one of the estuaries in California where sea otters have actually started to make a comeback. And they are also grazing these invasive green crabs and helping to restore the health of these estuaries. And so they're targeting an invasive species. It's almost like they know they shouldn't
Yeah.
be there. And so that's really cool. So sea otters are really important for kelp forests primarily, I would say, and then also for just estuarine health across the Pacific.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is really interesting because usually when you introduce this invasive species, there's usually no natural predators for that invasive species in the area. It's usually just us humans trying to hunt them down. But if you have these sea otters that could actually do the job for you, I think it's a great thing.
They really love to eat a lot. And that's the other thing too is right, they don't have blubber.
Yeah.
And so they need to eat a lot of food to keep their metabolism up and to keep warm. And in many cases they can consume, I believe it's up to a third of their body weight a day.
Wow.
And like a male adult sea otter can be 70, 80 pounds. So what does that come out to? Quick math, like 20, 25,
20-ish pounds. Yeah.
20-ish pounds, which is crazy. That's a lot of invasive green crabs or
Yeah.
sea urchins
Yeah, I could definitely see why they're so important in keeping those population levels of those species down. And yeah, I want to shift our focus to today's world. I want to ask, like, what are the biggest challenges that sea otters face in today's world?
Yeah, so I would say couple things. Broadly, I think there's not enough of them in the places that really need them. There's actually, like, to be clear, Alaska does not have a sea otter population problem. That's actually one of the few areas in the United States where they're thriving. There's hundreds of
Okay.
thousands of them along the Alaska coastline, and we kind of think that that is because of the structure of the Alaska coastline, right? Is very I don't know if you've spent much time looking at it on a map, but there's like a lot of archipelagos and like shallow coastal areas
Okay.
where they can kind of hide from predators or other animals that might want to eat them, and also like eat crustaceans. If you look at places like the Oregon coastline on a map, it's like basically a straight line, and there's not a lot of in and outs besides the estuaries, and so it's not the same sort of habitat that we have in Oregon as they do in Alaska, and so I guess the biggest challenge would be ideally at some point, and there are a lot of laws and regulations around this, but taking them from an area that has a thriving population of them that are doing well, and putting them in an area where that could really use them, like the Oregon coast or central or northern California.
Yeah, and have you guys tried taking otter populations from Alaska and putting them in Oregon in recent
Um,
times?
that I am trying to remember off the top of my head where the populations from the late 60s, early 70s reintroduction came from. I think they may have come from the Aleutian Islands, but I'm not sure. So I believe some of the sea otters that are now in Washington originally came um from Alaska, but I'm not entirely sure. And then differently, the Alaska, so those are all northern sea otters.
Yeah.
So in
Okay. Okay.
Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska, those are all northern. And then in California, it's sort of a different problem. They're kind of locked in this area on the central coast. There's a few thousand of them, and they're southern sea otters. So again, these are the ones that are actually just a little bit smaller than the northern ones. But they never fully went extinct in the area during the fur trade. But they're kind of running with this issue, and this is also where Elkhorn Slough is. It's in Central California. They're kind of geographically locked in that area, unfortunately, because if they try to go north or south, um, kind of away from the coastline and to kind of navigate to like spread,
Yeah.
they unfortunately are predated by juvenile white sharks who mistake them for seals. Um, White sharks do not normally consume seals or sea otters because they don't have blubber. They're not very like calorie
Yeah.
rich compared to a seal. So they actually usually take just an investigatory bite. And again, these are juvenile white sharks, so they're smaller. And they don't know yet how to differentiate between a seal and sea otter in the open ocean. But again, these creatures are still several feet long, and an investigatory bite from a shark of that size is
Probably just
often
kill the otter,
fatal.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so they're kind of locked in this area. That happens quite not I don't want to say quite often, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that sea otters are kind of locked on the central coast and can't expand on their own, or are doing so at a rate that's really slow. Um, so that's also kind of just an interesting problem that I think is
Yeah.
kind of crazy.
So before like people started hunting the otter population in California, were there even otter populations like around that area, or were they just stuck there?
Oh yeah. So they basically were from everywhere from these were like ballpark estimates. I'm just trying to give a
Yeah.
rough number, but basically all the way in on the North American West Coast, basically all the way through Alaska, down through British Columbia, through Washington, through Oregon, through California, and then basically stopped kind of around Baja, Mexico. And so they were basically everywhere. And
Uh,
now they're just in that one spot in California, um, a few thousand in Washington. British Columbia is doing pretty well, and then there's several hundred thousand in Alaska.
yeah, and I want to ask, like, if they were all along the West Coast, like before we started hunting them, then were there not like the sharks before we started hunting them that would eat them, or?
There were probably cases of that, right?
Hmm.
But if there's thousands more sea otters in these places, the actual like deaths that result from that are not actually meaningful in like
Oh,
the
okay, that
grand
makes sense.
population sense. But I'm sure it definitely still happens.
Yeah, and yeah, are orcas also eating it? I think I read an article somewhere saying that no, not only great white sharks eat these otters, but also orcas. Is that?
Mhm. Yeah, so orcas, there's three kind of different subs. They're not actual subspecies, but kind of like ecotypes of orcas. So there's resident orcas, there's transient orcas, and offshore orcas, and they all kind of eat different things. Some focus primarily on fish, some focus primarily on marine mammals, and then some have a hybrid kind of mix of fish and marine mammals. Um, I believe because I remember seeing this in the news. I think it was last year or the year before, where there was an orca that they found. I think it was in the Aleutian Islands or off of Japan or Russia, but that when it died and when it looked at its stomach content, it had like 20 something sea otters in it.
Wow.
Was that what you were referring
Yeah,
to?
yeah. No, no. I think my
Yeah.
science teacher like pulled it up and put it on one of my exams too. So
Yeah, so I think just going off the my memory from that, I remember that happening, and I can't say for certain that orcas regularly consume sea otters, but if they're hungry enough, I'm sure they'll go after them. But again, the broader thing is right is that sea otters are not like as calorically dense
yeah.
as seals, and so I'm sure if there were seals or other marine mammals around to consume, they would want to consume those because they have more blubber on them, and that's really the thing that they're after.
And so what I hear is the root of the problem that we don't have enough seals. Is this why they're going after the sea otters?
I again, I can't say for certain.
Okay.
I don't think to me, based on just seeing that article, that when that happened, and I'm to be clear, I'm sure it does happen from time to time. I don't think that's the common occurrence, and so
Okay.
I don't think that orcas do not have enough seals in some places, and so they're turning to predate sea otters. I think it may have just been kind of a one-off or something that happens from time to time, but I don't think that's the status quo,
Okay. And
is
what
what I
about the
would say.
great white sharks? Is it the same for them too?
Yeah,
Okay.
they don't like an adult great white will not predate a juvenile or a sea otter. It's usually the juvenile white sharks again that can't they haven't learned yet what a
Okay.
sea otter
Yeah,
looks like versus a seal, and so to them they think it's a seal.
I see. And I want to shift our focus to what's being done right now to help sea otters recover across the Pacific Ocean.
As I mentioned a little bit before, sea otters are listed as endangered under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act here in the United States. And as a result of that, there are some protections for them where it's basically a felony to do anything that harms them to some degree. Really, what we want to see happen is we want to have another go at a reintroduction attempt here in Oregon. And by we, I mean Environment Oregon and several of our partner
Hmm.
organizations. Another group in Oregon that's really focused on sea otter reintroduction is this group called the Alaka Alliance. Um, and we believe that reintroduction would be beneficial for the ecosystems kind of broadly, and would like to see that happen. Sea otters, like I talked about, are protected, and so like we as groups cannot just go and take sea otters and put them here. That would be
Yeah.
illegal. So we need to go through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they need to do a formal reintroduction process for them. Which is something that over the past 5 or 10 years or so was something that I think it was closer to within the 5 year time frame, was something that they were considering. But it's just a very slow moving process going forward. And so I guess the long and also short answer of your question is there's a lot being done to advocate for more sea otters in places that need them, if you could count that as a protection,
Yeah.
and then the laws themselves also protect them. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, protect the ones existing, but we would like to see more of them, and we think
Yeah.
reintroduction would be a way to do that.
And you mentioned like past reintroduction attempts. Some of them have been successful, some of them haven't. How do you guys plan to, make this attempt successful?
Yeah, so the group that I just mentioned, the Alaka Alliance, actually did a feasibility study, which basically looked at if sea otters were brought back to the Oregon coast,
Hmm.
would there be enough habitat for them, and would they have, like, basically would they benefit coastal ecosystems and really just improve things kind of overall. And what they found in that study was yes, like sea
Hmm.
otters have enough habitat. There is enough habitat that's suitable on the Oregon coast for them, and they would have a meaningful positive environmental impact if they were brought back. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service took a look at that study and thought it was really great, and then they basically authored a similar one the following year. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service authored, there we go, a separate feasibility study a couple years ago, and they also found the same conclusion, which is there was enough habitat, and there would be likely positive environmental impact from reintroduction.
So this time, are you guys going to introduce more than 100 sea otters? Is the plan just to increase the number of sea otters that you bring in from Alaska?
Yeah, so we don't know.
Okay.
It's kind of like it's just a very slow moving thing, and so the logistics of everything haven't even gotten to that point yet. I would say the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the past couple of years has actually been pretty quiet on reintroduction. Like they haven't formally come out and said they want to do it. They
Mhm.
haven't also said that they don't want to do it either. I think that they are trying to do due diligence and communicate with coastal communities along the coast who there are mixed opinions about bringing sea otters back, but I would say overall most people would like to see them here. And I think they are just trying to tread carefully, if treading at all right
Yeah.
now.
And you just mentioned the mixed opinions. Why do some
Mhm.
people not want the sea otters to come back?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, they need to eat a lot of food to maintain their body weight
Hmm.
in the Pacific. And as I've talked a lot about in this podcast, they really like purple sea urchins. That's their favorite food. And they also help with invasive species
Yeah.
like European green crabs. Unfortunately for us, that is not all they eat. They do consume other shellfish and other what we would deem as seafood, which in some places, like along the Oregon coast or the California coast, are fish that fishermen fish
Hmm. Oh,
and
I see.
make money off of and sell. And so there's a lot of back and forth and relationship building that needs to happen, and is currently trying to happen with coastal communities and coastal folks, like primarily fishermen, who are a little bit gun shy about reintroduction.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service like taking their time to sort of plan things out carefully? I think yeah, I personally think from your story of the starting from reintroducing 100 sea otters, they didn't really plan that one too well, and then you see how it failed. Do you think this is the right move for them right now, just taking their time and analyzing every aspect?
Um, I mean, personally, and from our organization, I think we would like to have them as soon as possible.
Hmm.
I think we see the negative impacts of that not having them is having. And every single day we're seeing increases in purple sea urchins.
Yeah.
And that's just going to continue to get worse and worse until there's a point where we might not have any kelp forests anymore. Um, so that's a huge problem. And I should say that trend also exists in places in California where there aren't sea otters too. So this isn't just an Oregon problem. I do understand that there are some, things that needed to be sorted out for a reintroduction to go well. But that's one of the great things about a formal reintroduction process with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife
Hmm.
Service is that even getting the ball rolling, like if they come out tomorrow, and again, I'm not saying they're doing this, but if they came out tomorrow and said that sea otters are coming back to Oregon, we want to do it, they wouldn't just put them back in the water the next day. There's years of public comment processes and drafts and plans and things that need to be commented on and have the public weigh in on and then adapted. And like it's like a multifactorial process even after the ball gets rolling. And so I have concern that the longer we wait, the less helpful it will be, as our coastal ecosystems continue to struggle.
Is there like a time frame estimate for when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service might like start putting out more information and giving you guys more
Um,
information?
yeah, I would say, and this is kind of just a ballpark number, right? I would say it is likely that those conversations will happen within the next 5 or 10 years. but I can't say for certain.
I see. And looking into the future, what gives you the most hope regarding sea otters?
Yeah, so I think a lot of our organizational time, or the time that I spend on trying to advocate for sea otters, is met with a lot of public interest.
Hmm.
People really think they're cute, and that's really helpful
Yeah,
overall from the start. But they also, after I get into explaining that they're not just a cute animal, they're also really, really important for these coastal ecosystems, the more that I can kind of see it tick in people's eyes, where when I explain that we have not a lot of kelp forests, and that's a problem because they're habitats for a whole host of species, and the reason we don't have kelp forests is because
we don't
we
have
have too
sea
many purple
otters.
sea urchins,
Yeah,
and we have too many purple sea urchins because we don't have sea otters and to some degree sunflower sea stars as well. And so when I'm explaining the story and seeing people like kind of digest it in their mind, I can see like the gears turning, and they leave the conversation understanding that this kind of seems like a no-brainer, where you can reintroduce a native species, help cut down on invasive species like European green crabs and help estuaries. They can help consume purple sea urchins, which are overgrazing our kelp forests. So that cuts down on the direct problem of too many purple sea urchins, and then that also has a positive effect on the kelp forests overall. And so when the long answer is like seeing people understand it as I educate them is really something that gives me a lot of hope. And I think it's an issue that continues to garner a lot of public support and attention. I don't know if you just saw this last week, actually, but Taylor Swift was seen wearing a T-shirt with a sea
I did
otter
not
on it
see that
from
actually.
the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And that was really cool. And that kind of visibility for sea otters just generally raised millions of dollars for the aquarium in one day, just on
Yeah,
a fluke. And so it's like it's clear to see that people really are interested in these animals, whether it's because they just think they're cute or for other reasons. I don't really know, but the more that we can kind of do to get the public excited about it, the better.
yeah. My hope is with the release of this podcast episode, some listeners can tune in and have that same experience that you just mentioned, get those gears turning inside their head, and hopefully see just how important these sea otters are for us. Yeah. And if a listener wants to help out personally, is there like anything they can do?
Yeah, so a couple things. So you can support organizations that are trying to get the word out about sea otters. So that would be groups like us, Environment Oregon, as well as groups like the Alaka Alliance, like I mentioned. We both do a lot of really great work trying to advocate for sea otters and bringing them back. You can go to aquariums along the coast that or not. They're not just on the coast, but go to aquariums that have sea otters. You can learn about them. So Monterey Bay Aquarium is a great example, like I just mentioned. Another one is the Oregon Coast Aquarium. They also have sea otters. I've visited them multiple times. And there's several others around the country, so you can kind of just Google that really quickly. The more that you can do to kind of just see them in person and learn about them and support, aquariums and places that, in often cases, are taking rehabs or sea otters that can't live in the wild anymore from an injury or from something else, that would be really great. And then the final thing you could do is just, besides like directly supporting these groups, is actually just advocate for sea otters. So tell your friends and family that the Pacific Coast is really struggling without them, and that we should bring them back. And then you can also comment or contact the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and just that oftentimes you can go to Google and find the contact information from the specific person you want to talk to, and you can just talk to them about sea otters and why they are on the coast, in the Pacific. Obviously, we don't want them on the Atlantic. They weren't
Yeah.
there before.
They would never survive the warm beaches and waters that we have over
Oh
here.
no, probably not.
Yeah. And as we wrap up this episode, are there any last words you would like to say to our listeners, Mr. Giancarlo?
No, I don't think so. I just wanted to say I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Giancarlo, for joining me today on H2O and Beyond. It was a pleasure having you as a guest. Well, listeners, hopefully you enjoyed that episode, and as Mr. Giancarlo mentioned before, hopefully you got those gears turning in your head, and you really see just how important these sea otters are to the Pacific coast. And if you want to be a guest on the podcast or have any episode suggestions or anything of that sort, there's a Google form linked in the description where you can share feedback. And yeah, And I'll also link the resources to Environment America and some links where you can learn more about sea otters in the description as well. And finally, make sure to check out our link tree in our bio to follow and subscribe to all the H2O and Beyond social medias. Thank you for listening to H2O and Beyond. I'm Alex. Stay curious and stay hydrated.